Hi again, everybody. I'm back at my painting spot. I'm out on my sun porch today because there's a good light here as opposed to upstairs in my studio. It's a little darker, so hopefully you can see everything well. Jenny Fergus here. This is episode 2 of Beauty in Imperfection, and it is part of my watercolor drops series, the beginning of it actually. So I'm working on the farmhouse painting, the commission painting today, and I'm looking at my piece, thinking about painting and what it means to me. And one thing I would like to say about the title of this section, Beauty in Imperfection, is that it says a lot about my philosophy about art and painting. I really don't want my pieces to be perfect renditions of reality or the natural world. I want them to definitely be very particular reactions and interpretations of everything I experience in the world. So imperfections to me really are beautiful because they show our individual marks and characters, our spirits, and it makes for art. That's what it really is about. Sometimes the titles for my pieces just come to me as I'm painting, and in fact the title Beauty in Imperfection came to me as I was approaching my spot today, approaching this video experience. So it is indicative of a lot of things. Anyway, I'm going to tilt the camera back down, get back into the painting. That spot that had to dry has definitely dried. So I'm going to tilt the camera down now. Hope you can see better. I've turned it. Turned it. Sorry. Let's see. I've turned it, so hopefully you will be able to see better. And I'll show my, sorry about all that, y'all. Told you this is imperfect. You'll be able to see my palette, my paper, and what I'm actually doing a little bit more completely. Let's see, there we go. Hopefully this is good. Okay. All right. So here's my little shape, and one thing I wanted to say is as I proceed here, I've got my first shape, and as I said before, the first shape is very crucial because of the placement and the proportion. It dictates everything for really the rest of the painting. So it's very important to get it put in the right spot. One thing I do, since like I said, I don't do any preliminary drawing, I do a lot of measuring, I guess you could say, with my brush or my finger. And as you can see, this part of the roof, we'll say this, it's about this big. So 1, 2, 3.5 of this section right here. So if I'm here, 1, 2, 3.5, the house will end hopefully around right here. And again, the height, this little roof, 1, 2, 3, about 3 times. So 1, 2, 3, it'll end around here. So I do a lot of that to make sure that I'm in the right spot. So here's some of that cerulean. Mix up a little bit more of it here with a little cobalt. Nope, there we are, cobalt. And a little bit of that Venetian red. Maybe too much. Just to tone it down a little bit, neutralize it a little bit. And one thing about watercolor, you may already know this or you may not. Watercolor is an incredible medium because it's the only medium that I know of that converses with you or moves as you paint. Whereas oil painting, acrylic painting, pastel painting, you know, you lay down those colors, your pigments, and they're not going to move. They're going to be wherever you put them. Watercolor changes as it dries and as it sits on the paper or touches other paint. And that's the fascinating and wonderful, and a lot of people say frustrating aspect of it. I wanted to point out, I don't know if you can see this, but this little shape, of course, has dried. And it was a mix, you know, like I said, of the cerulean blue, the cobalt blue, and the Venetian red. And as it dried, it created this beautiful little edge where the Venetian red was pushed out and really made a beautiful, very subtle edge around the shape. And there's no way, you know, I could have ever painted it. It created itself by the action of the water. So in watercolor painting, you're really learning about water and what it does, and learning how to say, okay, this is a great thing I can take advantage of. All right, now on to the roof here. Let's see. I wanted to get that little shape in there, but I think I'm going to do that in a second. I want to, this is a an angle that I need to make sure I get correct. It's about like that. And this is an edge of the roof that shows. So I'm going to go in and put that in. Now this edge is lower than this edge, where I've got that about in the right spot. This angle here, like this. Now this is a much lighter shape, so I'm going to use clear water to continue the paint there instead of adding in more paint, and touching any lines I might have made to soften lines. I don't really want too many lines here unless it's created with the paint on its own. I don't want to draw an outline, in other words. So, okay, so here's another intersection of the roof. If you don't know which direction something goes, if you lay the edge of your brush handle against it or pencil, it'll give you more of an idea. Like that is probably not even a 10% angle, but it does go up just a little bit. So that's good to know. And this is a weird place because the chimney goes up like this. So I've got to leave a place for that chimney. It divots down just a little bit, comes down, goes across. I'm not going to worry about where those two roof lines intersect right now because I'll darken one part of the roof once it dries. So make sure I've got this the way I want it. You know, when you're painting something like a house, and a house portrait at that, being a little bit more careful about your details is important, because someone's going to recognize those angles in their own home. Now, if I was just painting this for myself and it wasn't a quote portrait, those kinds of things wouldn't matter as much because no one's going to be thinking about. Oh, that doesn't look exactly like my house. And so you have more flexibility on what you're doing. Now, all right, I like that. I'm going to use one of my tried and true methods. I like to drop water into shapes while they're still wet. And this is a little darker than I want it to be. So since I've dropped water with the capillary action, it stops at the edge, which is a really cool aspect of watercolor. Now, it can jump those boundaries if you're not careful. You get too much water in there, but so I'm going to suck some of this up. Just to take up a little bit of the pigment. I want this roof to be light. It's not white, but it's very pale. And watercolor does dry lighter than it looks when it's wet. So your paintings always will look brighter or deeper when they're wet. So I'm going to drop this water back in, get that surface back active. Even that little bitty line, see how it holds the water? Such a great aspect of watercolor. Okay, now, here's the angle of that roof. And it's going down just a teeny bit, so it ends about right here. There's an odd little shape. Let's see, let me make sure I've got this right. Like this. It's a little bit lower. This little funny shape here. And it intersects. It intersects here about halfway from here to here. It's a little higher than I have it, and it tilts down just a smidge like this. Let's see, clean that up a little bit. And then this one is coming straight down like this. Okay, now that was going down, this one's going slightly up. I don't have that going down enough, I don't think. I'm going to go up a little bit with that. Let's see, and this roof is a little lower than this. Okay. All right, let's see now. This is going to come down like this, but it's higher than I have it, I think, just a little bit. Okay. I'm going to leave just a teeny bit of white there. It's actually darker in the image, but I may darken it later, but just a delineation. Leave a little delineation there. And then I've got this tiny little triangle there of roof that shows. So I'll put that in. Now, here is another little piece. It's almost on the exact same plane. I'll put that one in. Let's see, and that'll connect properly. Yeah, I guess. Let's see if I got that right. I'm going to go back up with this just a teeny bit. Okay. All right. I think that's about right. Now this one goes, let's see, it's this, and it goes here. Up there. That's all the roof there. Now let me get that in. One thing about these sable brushes, this is a Raphael, and my friend Jeremiah Patterson, who's an incredible painter, is the one who introduced me, to these brushes. They are a wonderful brush. They're not the most expensive of the sable brushes, but they are an investment brush. But the size 6, which I'm using, is not so terribly expensive. What I was going to say about them, though, is that whatever kind of brush you get for watercolor, you really want it to come to a good point and spring back to a point and not splay out. I'll fix that delineation later. I'm going to add some more water here. Add a little bit here. Now this is a little darker in here than I want it, so I'm going to suck some of that water back up. You want the brush to come to a good point and spring back to a good point. Now, any brush, after you've used it too much, will eventually lose its point. This one's still pretty good. And part of that's taking care of your brush and not leaving it to dry, pressed up against some kind of a cup, or leaving it in water while you're in between painting passages. You want to take care of these because they'll serve you a long time if you do. I do prefer them over synthetics. I used synthetics for a long time, but once I got these and got used to them, I don't know if I could go back. I certainly wouldn't be happy to be going back. So I would highly recommend it. I like these Raphael brushes a lot. I also like the Isaby. They're the ones with the gray strip around their handles. And those are also sable. So this whole configuration of angles here are the roof. Now let me make sure I haven't left something out. I think I'm going to sharpen this angle just a smidgen right here. Just a teeny bit. See if I can do it without messing anything up. Let's see. I just want it to be a little sharper. I think I'll like that better once it's finished. Now there's a lot of times in watercolor you have to leave things alone, but sometimes, especially when it's still really wet, you can make adjustments. And with the further detail work I will do later, I don't think that's gonna be a problem there. Okay, so that's just a very abstract pattern of the roof, and let's measure myself. Let's see, what was I gonna do? Oh, I didn't get that little tiny bit. Now, I didn't get that. Let's put that back in there. Let's just have a teeny little divot right there. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, and I'm a little off, a little longer than it actually is, but that'll be okay. I'll make it a little bit lower to kind of get the proportions back, but it's a pretty good placement. So that's how I start something like really particular, like a house with all these angles in the roof. Now, it'd be great to be able to go on in and put the chimneys in, but they will bleed into the roof, so I'm going to wait on that. Now we'll look over and say, okay, here's this little, I think that was a smokehouse. Just thinking about, you know, how far away is it from the house? So if we're using that as a measure, a little more than 1. So about right in here. And also it intersects, if I pull this horizontal line over, about halfway up the house. So probably about here would be the roof line that I see. And then the yellow or the tannish color part of the barn. I might do a very pale version of what I have for the roof, starting the roof of this. Let's see. Okay. Now, which direction is that going? It's actually going up. From my point of view, it almost looked like it was going down. So I'm glad I tested it. And this is a very pale roof. Now I'm going to sort of fuzz it over here because the trees are going to be there. One interesting thing about watercolor, I don't care how pale this looks. When it dries, you will see a difference in the painted area versus the paper, no paint. It is amazing how much it can show, even something that thin. So I'm going to give that a dollop of water. I'm going to let it dry, sit up and dry, so that'll take a while. Now, here, I think these are irises. Another thing about painting for me is I like clear colors. So I'm going to use a little of this, I think that's cat orange. And a teeny bit of this, I think that's cad yellow pale, I think, mixed. Now, transparent watercolor, so meant to be used transparently. So if I try to paint this clear, bright yellow orange on top of green, it will not look good, and it will not be clear and bright. So while I'm waiting, I'm going to dab in a few of these tiny flowers. And I'm not worrying about details here. It's suggesting, it's the shapes. I might even accentuate it a little bit, give it a little color. Because way over here, let's see if the house coming around, there's some more of them over here by this little smokehouse. No, the granary. That's what that was. So they're smaller. I'm just going to put them in there a little bit. And they can dry while I'm waiting for the rest of it. That way I won't forget them. They will be bright and clear. Now this color, I would use some of this in my chimneys. So I might pull that on up. I don't want chimneys to be bright red, but they're a pretty nice clear brick. They're about like that. So they're sort of orangey, but I'll probably touch them with something later to tone them down once I get them in there. But I'll leave that there for myself. This again is almost the color of the smokehouse, almost the color of the flowers. Now, while I'm waiting, while this is wet, I'll drop a little of this brighter yellow in some of these shapes so they can get mixed on the paper. Don't want to have a construction paper look. Now this yellow is too dark and bright for the shed, but I can mix it in with some of this roof color I've been using. It's immediately going to tone it down and neutralize it. Put in a little of that orange. And getting close to the shed color there. I think I'll add a little bit more cat orange into it. Just a little bit more. A nice thing too, if you use a metal palette or even a plastic one that's white like mine, you will see what the colors are going to basically, you know, look like on your paper. I'm not a fan of any kind of gray palette or any other color, or even a clear palette for watercolor, because you can't tell what you're doing. Let's see. I'm going to add a little of this Scarlet Lake. Okay, I like that a little better. I would use that very thinly. But I feel like I can go on and touch a little of this over here. Now, I got those flowers are pretty big, but that's okay. Let's see. This is lower, but it's... I'm going to touch some of this in. Now, there's a lot of greenery here. I will leave some space for some of that. It's kind of... This is going to be very thin, so let's see what we got going there. That's just the side of the smokehouse, and it's an old building, which is beautiful. Let's see, and this came down. Comes out just a... I'm gonna do that. A little peeking through back there. Can't hurt anything. Now I'm going to touch that with clear water too. I like to see what it'll do. So I'm dotting all over the paper right now. This is not a traditional approach to watercolor, but it's what I have developed over the years. And it does work for me, and a lot of that is because I don't do any preliminary drawing. I'm going to just dot that up a little bit. Now, people think my paintings look really fast, and sometimes they are fast, but something like this takes more time, and I have to let things dry. I'm not putting the stump in, as per my client's request to leave it out. She used to have big, I don't remember what they were, cedar trees, I think, but they had to be cut down because they got a disease. So we're going to leave that out. So right now, I'm at another place where I'm going to stop. Sorry about that. Thanks again. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.